Roads across Ecuador remain blocked. Roads across Ecuador remain blocked as protests against the government's austerity measures continue. Cameroon's president frees opposition leader from prison.
The breakup.
And in Sweden, North Korea breaks off talks with U.S. officials, citing inflexibility from officials of the Trump administration. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I'm Camila Escalante. We begin in Ecuador as protesters are blocking highways all around the country. Protests continued around Ecuador on Friday night against the government's decision to remove state subsidies for fuel and diesel as part of a number of austerity measures. These images are from the areas around the center of Quito, where primarily students and young people confronted police in large protests, which ended with the heavy use of tear gas. The measures, which included mass layoffs and amendments to workers' rights, has been implemented to meet the requirements of a $4.2 billion loan from the International Monetary Fund. Ecuador's indigenous rural organizations continue to protest on Saturday. They have vowed to maintain pressure on the government to overturn President Lenin Moreno's austerity measures. Some Ecuadorian media has reported total blockage of roads in provinces with the largest percentage of indigenous population, such as Cotopaxi, Imbabura, and Chimborazo. While some stretches of highway have been reportedly militarized, others have maintained the roadblocks. While some number of transport unions in the city of Quito have decided to resume services, other sectors around the country are just beginning to mobilize. Indigenous people around the country vow to take action to reject the newest economic measures.
In response to the rejection and the indifference that the President of the Republic has shown to our demands, there is nothing left but to call for a great indefinite indigenous protest until the President listens to the voice of the poorest sectors, until the President listens to the needs of the majority of Ecuadorians. We demand that the President withdraw the latest economic measures adopted because of the IMF. We demand that the President halts mining projects in this country. We demand that he stops acting against the poorest of the country. That is why, from the Ecuadorianari, we are here to say that we are millions, and millions will be here for our homeland, today, tomorrow, and always.
Several human rights organizations are expressing concern over the treatment of protesters who have been detained at marches in the city of Quito over the past few days.
A number of human rights organizations have been here since the night of October 3rd, observing the situations in which people have been arrested during the social protests which have been held amid economic measures. We have counted 160 people who have been arrested, have been detained by irregular processes. People have been hit and are in bad condition, and there have also been restrictions to their rights to defense. Many of us had not been able to speak with them, despite being accredited as human rights lawyers. That's among the things we want to denounce, that there has not been adequate management of ways in which these people have been processed.
Our correspondent Denise Herrera has the latest from Quito.
Hello, we are at the Loyal Faro Avenue, one of the main avenues of Quito. We are walking through the main streets in Quito, and we see that the bus transportation is not regular. We should remember that yesterday the Transport Federation said that they end with their strike. They said that they will discuss the latest situation of Ecuador with authorities. And despite this decision, several social organizations of workers and the indigenous movement said that they will continue with their strike. We know until now that in different provinces of Ecuador, like Chimborazo and the Carchi province, are taking actions against the latest economic measures announced by President Lenin Moreno. They are against the oil, to end with the oil subsidy. They said that these decisions are directly affecting the citizens. We don't know until now if the bus transportation will be regular through the city. We know that until now, just the municipal transport and the taxi drivers are working regular today.
Earlier, we spoke to professor and analyst Fernando Casado about the handling of the protests by President Lenín Moreno and his government, and what the recently announced state of exception means for Ecuadorians.
What he's trying to create is also this atmosphere of fear in Ecuador. This announcement of the state of emergency is absolutely focused on trying to demobilize the transport groups that are now blocking virtually the whole country. You can see roadblocks in every important city and in every important road. And at the same time, he's trying to curb and trying to prevent demonstrations against the measures. What he's now letting the military and also the policemen do is that without any previous announcement, they can simply try to dismantle all these Pacific or all the demonstrations all over the country, also in order to prevent these blocks from going on. So in a way, what we have seen, or what we are seeing here in Ecuador, is a situation of a real dictatorship, where rights like the right to association, meeting, or demonstration have vanished completely, even against the rights that are implemented or in the Constitution.
We'll take a break now, but right after the break, we'll be speaking to social movement activists from Argentina about the upcoming elections. Join us again in a minute. To Gerardo Gamarra, an activist with ALBA Movements and the Frente Patria Grande Argentina. Thanks so much for being with us, Jera.
Hello, everyone.
Let's start with the protests that we saw last month, in which people were demanding the passing of an emergency food law. These protests were largely focused around the issue of poverty. What was that bill and why was it necessary?
Well, the emergency food is a resource that social movements were pushing because the poverty here in Argentina, since Macri's government arrived, has been increased a lot. Actually, this week it comes out the last index of poverty, and it reveals that 35% of population is under the poverty line, which it means 15 million people that hasn't earned so much salaries to afford the minimum necessaries.
Can you tell us a little bit about what some of the issues are that people will be voting on come this October 27th for the general election? It sounds like poverty is one of the most important issues, as it's a growing problem. What else are people looking for?
Yeah, poverty certainly is one of the most important issues that we have here, but we can mark a big process of mobilizations since 2017, when the pensions reform was implemented, and it was a very rejected measure from all the society here in Argentina, not also the social movements or the left-wing sector. Since then to today, the government has taken many anti-popular measures, and until August, when the primary elections, the result was very bad to Macri's government, which means that the population reject the plan here in Argentina, which is an alliance between the government and the IMF. The IMF was released a lot of money, the biggest refund here in Argentina, but there is more rejections with that. because the return to the IMF is also a turning point for Argentina since 2001.
As you said, President Mauricio Macri performed quite poorly in these primary elections which just passed, which heavily favored Alberto Fernandez as candidate to win these elections. How do you feel social movements view the re-election campaign of Macri and his vice president?
Well, there is a lot of social movements and a big sector of the popular movements that made an alliance, and they are supporting the Alberto Fernandez candidacy because the whole of society is looking for an exit, for a way out of this neoliberal process. And the social movements are supporting Alberto Fernandez, but there also are with some alarms because after the elections we have to afford a very tough process to pay the debt, to refund the alliance with the IMF, and to decrease, to make something to the taxes decrease, because today the taxes are above 70%, and there is also a big external debt.
And do you see any similarities between the case of Argentina with Macri's IMF deal, which seems to be a very large issue there, with the protests that broke out this week here in Ecuador?
Well, I think that the most similar process is that alliance between governments of all the region, the neoliberal governments here in the region, with the IMF to set up a neoliberal process in the whole continent. I think that the process in Ecuador is reflecting the rejection of the society to that measures, to that anti-popular measures. And here in Argentina, we are seeing that rejection since 2 years ago. And now with the electoral process, we start to think that maybe it's a kind of come out of this process. But the main thing is, clearly the society is not according with these policies of these governments.
It seems as if the leftist sectors of the country are going to support Alberto Fernandez and the vice presidential candidate, former president Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner, come this October 27th. What are people hoping is going to be the big change that they're going to make if elected?
This form with Alberto Fernandez and Cristina Fernandez, it reminds some of the best times in Argentina, which was since 2003, 2015. And of course, the alliance between Peronism and some sectors of the left-wing movements and popular movements are expecting that with Alberto Fernandez as a president, we can find out an exit of this neoliberal process and start a new process here in Argentina that could include the whole of the society, because the last 4 years most of the people was rejected, was unemployed, and was getting into much poverty than before. So it's a kind of hopefully process that we're gonna start here.
Thank you so much for your insight. We've been speaking to Gerardo Gamarra. He is an activist with Alva Movimientos and the Frente Patria Grande Argentina. Thanks again. Hope to speak to you soon.
Goodbye and thank you.
Moving on, Colombia's Special Jurisdiction for Peace, or the JEP, has removed 3 FARC leaders from the legal benefits of the peace agreement and also excluded them from the JEP for taking up arms again.
To declare the loss of all the benefits and guarantees granted to Iván Luciano Márquez Marín Arango, José Manuel Sierra Sabogal, and Henry Castellanos Garzón. The video titled, "While There Is a Will to Fight, There Will Be Hope of Winning," that came to La Luz, published on August 29, 2019, shows, according to the report of the Directorate of Criminal Investigation and Interpol, delivered in Case 001 to the 3 appearing parties that occupy us, carrying firearms and dressed in military garments.
Indigenous delegations from several pan-Amazonian countries have gathered in Rome ahead of a synod on the Amazon by Pope Francis. Ahead of the synod, indigenous leaders held a conference in Rome titled Voices of the Amazon, Land, People, and Religions, to warn the world about the threats the Brazilian Brazilian president, Jair Bolsonaro, poses both to indigenous people and the environment. They're also preparing the working document for the synod that will see bishops from 9 pan-Amazonian countries discussing the social injustices and crimes indigenous people are facing in Latin America.
We are asking for help from all over the world because we are very concerned about this new policy of exploring the Amazon. The federal government wants to open our territory to mineral exploration, and it is not only a region, but all those populated by other indigenous peoples in Brazil. This represents a social, cultural, and ecological threat, not only to indigenous peoples, but to the whole of Brazil. It is a threat to our health.
And in yet another blow to Jair Bolsonaro's government, the prosecutor's office in Brazil's Minas Gerais state has filed charges against tourism minister Marcelo Antonio for allegedly embezzling public funds through fake candidates during the 2018 elections. We'll take a short break now, but after that, the number of people killed in anti-government protests in Iraq climbs to almost 100. Join us again after this. Welcome back. The Cameroonian government has freed opposition leader Maurice Kamto from prison. Kamto, who is the main rival of Cameroon President Paul Biya, was released from prison along with another 100 members of the Cameroon Resistance Movement Party. Charges against him were dropped in what the government said was a gesture of national reconciliation. He was arrested in January after leading nationwide protests against the government.
There should be general amnesty to each and every one so that we can start on a clean slate. And this culminating with the end of the dialogue, it could really show that government has good faith, and then we can see now how they can implement some of the other recommendations.
Hundreds of protesters have taken to the streets in the Libyan capital of Tripoli against leader of the Libyan National Army, Khalifa Haftar. Protesters chanted slogans and held banners denouncing Haftar and the United Nations envoy to Libya, Ghassan Salami. Haftar has been trying to take over Tripoli from the UN-backed government since early April, but he's been met by resistance from local armed groups who are against his move. Thousands of people from Ethiopia's largest ethnic group celebrated their annual harvest festival in Addis Ababa. People dressed in traditional white costumes marched in the streets, singing and dancing for the festival, which is celebrated by Oromo people to mark the start of the harvest season. The festival is usually held in the Oromia region, but this year, the celebrations have returned to the capital, Addis Ababa, for the first time in 150 years. The Oromo people make up about a third of Ethiopia's population. The number of people killed in anti-government protests in Iraq has risen to almost 100 as demonstrations continue for the 5th day. At least 5 people are reported to have been killed in the capital during the latest clashes after security forces used live ammunition to disperse protesters. People are protesting against rising unemployment, poor public services, and corruption. The protests mark the first major challenge to Prime Minister Abdel Mahdi's government, nearly a year after he came to power.
In this revolution, we are all one people, not a million different ones, just one people. No one represents us. Those who go to the parliament wearing suits in order to represent us don't represent us. We don't want parties. If 100 of us die, next time we will be 1 million. None of these protesters belong to a religious establishment or party.
Working-level nuclear talks in Sweden between North Korea and the United States have fallen through, slashing hopes for restarting negotiations after a failed summit in Vietnam in February.
The breakup of the negotiation without any outcome is totally due to the fact that the U.S. would not give up their old viewpoint and attitude. The U.S. raised expectations by offering suggestions like a flexible approach, new method and creative solutions, but they have disappointed us greatly and dampened our enthusiasm for negotiation by bringing nothing to the negotiation table.
Thousands of demonstrators have marched to the United States Embassy in the Greek capital, Athens, protesting against Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's visit. Protesters said they're against the presence of U.S. Army bases in Greece and also condemned NATO war operations. Demonstrators burned U.S. and NATO flags outside of the embassy and chanted slogans against Pompeo. The U.S. official was in Greece to reinforce cooperation with its NATO ally, signing an amendment to a mutual defense agreement.
We want to shut down all the USA and NATO military bases, to come back all the soldiers, all the Greek soldiers from all over the world. We want to disengage our country from US and EU and all the imperialist organizations.
Relations have been strained between South Korea and Nigeria after the recent xenophobic attacks. The reprisals from Nigeria didn't make it any better. The recent state visit by Nigerian president to South Africa has helped set the record straight. Both countries already have connections that won't be broken even by violence. Our correspondent in South Africa, Matuba Maslaji, explores what South Africans love about Nigeria.
Leaders of Africa's top economies say they want to work together to end xenophobic violence that almost derailed the ties between the two nations. But South Africa and Nigeria have been speaking the universal language to each other, even amid the tensions we've seen in recent days. Music produced in Nigeria has had a major impact on South Africa's music playlists. So we are here in Ga-Rankuwa, where we've seen shops owned by migrants being targeted during the xenophobic violence. But we're here for a different reason now, to find out why local people love Nigerian music. And I've got my dancing shoes on. Let's go. DJ Percy Sledge is the morning drive show host for the local radio station with a big following from young people.
As radio presenters and also artists to make sure we unite Africans, the music, the kind of music that we play on air, and also making sure whenever like the xenophobic attacks, we condemn such things on air.
A few kilometers away from Ga-Rankuwa, there is another township, Soshanguve. Reports of xenophobia have been reported here too. Popular DJ who goes by the name of DJ Madness says sometimes it's not xenophobia.
It's more of ignorance than xenophobia, in my opinion. You know, people are very misinformed. I think the problem is that there's too much fake news, you know, social media is contributing to that. Things go viral, things get out of hand, things get blown out of proportion, you know.
Xenophobia is undisputed and it's happening in South Africa, but why do we love Nigerian music so much?
their dance hall, man. It has that thing, man. You know, especially at their accent, the way they pronounce words. You know. So yeah, man, it has that thing, man, which makes us fall in love with them and also their music.
In the last 3 years, I'd say they're responding well to Davido and as well as Burna Boy. But what I've also noticed is that they also respond to the collaborations that we have with them. For example, the biggest song by AKA Fela and Versace, it was very huge, and it's because it had the Nigerian influence, you know what I mean?
While the political leadership is important in restoring stability, it's also important to put the finger on the pulse of what ordinary people feel at the worst of times. Matiba Matlachi for Telesur in Soshanguve, South Africa.
We've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Camila Escalante. Thanks for watching.